This is In the Loop. I'm Christian Bryant. The landscape for sports fans is wider than ever, both because there are more ways to watch thanks to streaming options, and because there are more sports available to watch. But while certain sports are doing well in this landscape, others are struggling to adapt, even sports that have long been mainstays of American culture. We'll look at why that is here in the latest edition of our In the Loop series on the business of sports, Scoreboard. For younger sports fans, their sports interests might look vastly different from older fans. Sports like esports, soccer, and Formula One racing have seen considerable growth in the US, largely driven by interest from millennials and Gen Z. As the internet, new technology, and globalization bring the world together and slowly turn all of us into fans of K-pop and Danish crime dramas, we're seeing the same thing happen in the sports world. More and more Americans are becoming fans of international sports. We talked about it with Roxanne Kosh, a University of Florida communications professor who has studied both sides of the international sport divide, both in her native France and here in the US.
We're getting to a point where this generation has grown up with the ability to kind of speak their mind and be who they truly are, perhaps more so than any other generation before. And so I think that, and also the ability of having access to niche environments, niche sports in this case, but niche anything through the power of the internet.
Let's start with the huge jump in US fandom for Formula One racing. The international car racing series has found hundreds of millions of fans around the world, and despite decades of efforts to hold races in the US, it couldn't compete with the attention in the States that American racing series like NASCAR or IndyCar got. But F1 took a different approach.
Verstappen is out of the race, and that's a big crash!
Creating Formula One Drive to Survive, a behind-the-scenes documentary series released on Netflix that tracks every driver and staff from every racing team. Now it's a smash hit among American fans. The first Miami Grand Prix, held in May, sold out a capacity of 240,000 fans over its 3 days in the Sunshine State. And polling tracking the recent uptick in F1 fandom tie it back to the Netflix series. A Morning Consult poll released in March found that more than a third of fans aged 18 to 34 in the US became fans just in the last year, and that more than half of all F1 fans said the Netflix series was a reason for their fandom. To some extent, the success of a behind-the-scenes docudrama and driving new interest in a sport shouldn't be a surprise. Ohio State economics professor Trevon Logan, who has done years of research on sports economics, told us why.
A lot of what we're consuming in this is really about these narratives that have sort of mythologies attached to them. And so you have these great narratives. And then at the individual level, you need these compelling narratives about people.
And it's accessible too. The documentary series is available on Netflix, while races air on ESPN and their streaming services. And we've seen more established leagues also try their hand at streaming their games. MLB is experimenting with new broadcast techniques and games streaming on Apple TV this season, including weaving in more live stats. And NFL fans might be in for a bit of a shock when they try to find the Thursday night games this year. They'll be on Amazon Prime for the next decade plus. As more and more people cut the cord and don't rely on cable, leagues might need to find other sources of money and other places for fans to watch, according to Southern Utah University professor and sports economics expert David Berry.
They're gonna go wherever the audience is going. So if the audience is leaving traditional cable or traditional networks and they're going to streaming services, then the leagues are gonna follow where that audience is going. The great thing about sports is that it's different from a television program in that you have to watch a sporting event live for it to mean something to you.
But while F1 has seen a lot of growth, the sport that's made arguably the biggest jump into the US mainstream has been the one the rest of the world loves most of all, soccer. Accessibility has played a role here too, as US channels have paid for the rights to air events like the World Cup and European soccer leagues and put them on TV and streaming platforms. The game, internationally known as football, has struggled for a long time to gain traction in the US, but surveys show it's now the fourth most popular sport in the US, having passed hockey. And fan analysis from the soccer marketing firm Gilt Edge found that nearly 70% of soccer fans in the US are under the age of 40. And it's definitely a more diverse crowd, as immigrants or kids of immigrants from soccer-crazed countries bring their love for the game to the States.
I started to see a lot of intersections with immigration history, with a lot of my own upbringing as the son of Mexican immigrants, and a deep love for the sport in Mexico and also other Latin American countries.
California State Long Beach history professor Ulysses Pena told us that in studying the rise of soccer in the US and specifically in Southern California, he's seen the two LA teams in Major League Soccer improve their efforts to appeal to Latino fans.
A few years after the founding of the league, especially when Major League Soccer began to experience financial turmoil, they started to think of new ways of generating revenue. And one of those ways was to cater to that existing fan base, which was predominantly Latino.
We've seen the growth of the game domestically across a range of demographics, with the US women's national team winning the last two FIFA Women's World Cups, the men's national team improving, and the rise of men's and women's professional leagues like MLS and the NWSL. MLS has expanded dramatically in the last 20 years, nearly tripling in size from just 10 teams in 2002 to 28 teams this year, with a 29th set to join in 2023. And its female counterpart, the NWSL, has seen success with expansion, with LA's new club Angel City FC playing its first match last month in front of a sellout crowd. But even clubs abroad have attracted their share of diehard fans here. And it's a common sight to see American fans crowd into bars across the US on weekend mornings and afternoons to show their love for soccer clubs an ocean away. So what does it look like as more Americans dedicate themselves to the world's game? Well, we hit the bars earlier than usual to find out more. It's a scene very few people might have expected to see even just a few years ago. Thousands of American soccer fans spread out across several bars rooting for a club an ocean away. It's a Saturday afternoon, but people have been here for a long time. What time did you get here today?
Got here about 8:30.
So, these Liverpool supporters are here to watch their team face Real Madrid in the annual pinnacle of European soccer, the UEFA Champions League final. And they are dedicated to their club.
Before I met her, we didn't win. I met her, and we started winning.
You're building some good credit right now, husband.
Champions League, I was like...
Half our wedding was talks about
3 months later, I proposed to her.
Yeah.
1 year later, I married her. And now we've got a kid on the way who's going to be a Liverpool supporter.
Yeah.
As European soccer fandom grows in the US, they are able to find community together.
I think that there is something really special about the community, and especially here at the Queen Vic. It's like you come here, you know everyone. It's like the Cheers bar. It's a very, very special place.
But for these diehards, getting up early on a weekend morning is a regular occurrence.
You lose a day at least. Yeah, I lose. I planned my life around it. My sister didn't get married until it was the international break because she knew I would not do her makeup or anything if Liverpool was playing.
The time difference still makes watching a challenge, but it used to be a lot harder.
When I first moved to the U.S., finding soccer to watch on TV was like I would wake up at 5 in the morning to watch the obscure, not ESPN, some weird random sports station that would show a half hour.
Until recently, soccer was a niche sport. Americans might have played it, but didn't necessarily watch it. And if they did, those fans often had some tie to a country that loved soccer. It's something that Peru-born and England-raised Luis Miguel Echegaray knows well. He's a soccer analyst for CBS Sports and the host of the Que Golazo podcast.
I would have to go to an English or an Irish pub, right? And trying to wake up at 8 in the morning, and I'd hope that the bar was open, and then it would just be me and maybe 2 other people. just having breakfast and watching the game.
Even then, the reach to new fans was often limited.
So initially when they start, broadcasting these games in the American market, the audience is going to be small because even if you were interested, you don't have anyone to talk to about it. But if everybody in your house is interested in the event, that makes the enjoyment that much better.
But as the internet and social media shrink the world and make connections easier, it's made it easier for soccer to reach more Americans.
The US, right, from a hypothetical perspective, is the perfect laboratory for soccer because it's an immigrant nation where you have so many different points of view from all over the world. And if soccer is the world's game, the US in itself is that little bubble where you can experience it from so many angles.
And that lab is producing fans in a whole range of ways. EA Sports' FIFA video game has attracted millions of players in the US, introducing the game to a whole generation of fans. In addition to the growth of domestic leagues like MLS and the NWSL, Team USA has seen success. The men's national team has made it to the knockout stage of the World Cup in 2002, 2010, and 2014. And the women's national team has dominated, winning the last 2 Women's World Cups and becoming vocal advocates for gender equality. That's something Abby Greensfelder tells us has led to growth. She's the executive producer of LFG, a documentary about the women's national team's pay fight.
You're seeing people saying, wow, there's an audience for this. There's a lot of unrealized business growth and audience growth because we have this huge youth soccer culture in the States for boys and girls. And the parents are going and there's interest in Premier League is growing. It's kind of all boats rise.
And the English Premier League has become a phenomenon in its own right. NBC bought the rights to show the top English soccer league's matches in 2013 and said they set a record this year with 12 games this season topping 1 million viewers in the US. The fans we talked to say being able to watch games on national TV and streaming has made a world of difference.
It came over to America when NBC bought the rights to the Premier League, and I've been living the dream ever since.
And the growth of soccer here has meant some opportunities for big business. Ryan Gordon, the owner of several neighborhood bars who coordinated the watch, says the growth has been explosive the last few years.
I mean, we had at times where we'd have for like even a bigger match, like let's say versus Man City or Chelsea or Man United, we'd have like 5 to 20 people here, at an 11 o'clock match. And now you can't even. We have to open up 3 other bars to be able to watch like a Man U match or like a any sort of like final or something like that.
And even though the Liverpool fans saw their club lose to Real Madrid, they've still found a club and a sport worth celebrating. And this was a loss.